Welcome to today's Transparent Choice webinar. This one should be quite short, and we're going to focus on one thing that is guaranteed to make your PMO and your projects fail. It's the most common complaint that we hear from PMOs when we talk to them around the world, and it's basically, I've got too many projects. How do I solve that? And fundamentally the problem is that executives or the senior stakeholders choose a portfolio that is just not deliverable. Too many projects in there for the amount of resource that you've got. And that's what we're going to look at today, is how to solve that problem, how to get your portfolio so that it is right-sized. So let's dive in. So here's number one problem. Time and again, we hear PMOs really struggling with this. And it can be kind of tough. It's quite a difficult one. It can feel a little bit like this. Let's see if we can get this video going. So having an overloaded portfolio can feel a bit like this. We all know what's going to happen. We all know it's coming. And yet it's still going to come. There it is. Boom. All right. That's what it sometimes feels like to be a PMO in charge of a portfolio that you know is overloaded. You know something's going to hurt. You know there's going to be a crash. And you're just waiting for it to happen. So this is serious stuff. When you're overloaded, your team is just spread too thin. Now this is really important. It means that you end up time slicing. They're being pulled from project to project. Very often what we find is that any sense of prioritization goes out the window. And when people are overworked, they tend to respond to whoever shouts the loudest to get stuff done. So, prioritization control tends to go out the window. And when people are rushing, when they feel under pressure, they tend to make mistakes. And so the irony here is that, the more rushed and overloaded your people are, the more time slicing they do, which slows them down, and the more mistakes they make, which slows them down, and you actually end up delivering less. So if you want to speed up, slow down is kind of the ironic message. What this all leads to is what most PMOs have experienced at some point or other, which is missed deadlines, blown budgets, failed projects, missed scope. You get the picture. You've probably all lived this. One of the things that I do get asked is, or often end up talking about, is this thing of time slicing, and why does that cause you to slow down? Why is that a problem? And we've got a couple of webinars where some really expert people are talk about this, and I'll give you links at the end of the webinar. But to help you kind of see it in action, I thought I would share a little experiment that I did. It's just a bit of fun for a couple of minutes here. I did this experiment on my twin boys. They were 8 years old when I did this to them. So it was about 9 months ago, something like that. And every day they have this homework that they do where they're practicing their times tables. So the idea here is that they have to fill in every cell in this grid, right? So in the top corner there, you've got 3 times 2. And then in this one, you've got to do 2 times 8. And then this one, you've got to do 5 times 2, and so on. Now, there are 2 ways that you could tackle this, any number of ways, but there are 2 ways that people tend to naturally tackle this. The way that, because we're taught to read left to right, the way most people would tackle it is like this. You'd go along the rows and work down the sheet like that. That's great. However, when I looked at that, what I saw is that they're changing task quite frequently. So for example, as you go along the row, you're going 2 times 3, 2 times 8, 2 times 5. So in your memory, you're holding that 2. That's the task I'm doing. 2 times whatever this number is at the top. So 2 times 3, 2 times 8, 2 times 5, 2 times 7. Great. Boom, 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 boom. Now I'm changing task to 5 times. 5 times 3, 5 times 8, 5 times 5, 5 times 7. Now I'm changing task again to 8 times. And to fill in this whole grid, you're going to change task 10 times. Now, there's another way of doing it. You could go down the columns. And if you do that, my task becomes 3 times 2, 3 times 5, 3 times. And I go all the way down here before I have to change task to 8 times. Now, this is a really trivial example. But if you look at it, right, instead of, whoops, gone too far. Instead of changing task 10 times as you go down here, you change task 4 times. And I timed them doing this. And it made just under a 20% difference in how long it took them to do the task, to complete the task. They were 20% quicker, just a little less than 20% actually. It was 17 or 18% quicker by simply reducing task switching. Now, as I said, this is a pretty trivial thing. The tasks that your teams are doing are going to be much more complicated, and the swap over time is going to be much longer because you've got to get your head out of one task into another, figure out where you got to, pick up the pieces, remember what you were going to do next, and get started, right? So you've just lost, a chunk of time. So this is a really concrete example of why overloading is bad, and it's an example that you can go off and experiment with your own kids and see if it works for them as well. So how do you fix this problem? Well, this is fundamentally a problem about stakeholder alignment and resource visibility. Most people think that this is just an issue of resource visibility, right? Being able to see how much resource do I have available and how many projects can we support with those resources, right? But it's not. It's also about stakeholder alignment, because you're going to pick a portfolio. And if your stakeholders aren't aligned about the way that you're picking that portfolio, then they're going to try and sneak around the edges of the process, and they're just going to try and jam their projects in anyway. And then you're going to end up with an overloaded portfolio, because if everybody's trying to jam projects in, it means that they're also not going to throw other people's projects out, because if they throw somebody else's project out, their project is in danger of getting thrown out. Okay, so you've got to have stakeholder alignment around what the portfolio is there to achieve. What does value look like? How are we going to objectively assess our projects in a way that we can determine which project is more important than another project? So what does that look like? I'm going to show you in software. So everything I've said here, you can do, I guess, in other tools as well. But this is what we do. This is our software. I'm going to show you in a minute. But just take this as a good example of how you get it done. And you can potentially do it using other tools if you want to. Essentially what you do is you build a list of criteria, you brainstorm a list of goals and objectives that the stakeholders have. It's a little brainstorming exercise. And you arrange them, and so they become criteria that we're going to use to measure our projects. And then we go through a process where you bring the stakeholders together. Here they are down here. And you ask them to answer simple questions. And we do this in real-time online meetings, real-time collaborative meetings. So your stakeholders can be anywhere in the world, which is great. So geography, suddenly, you don't need to bring people together to have this discussion. And you ask them really straightforward questions like, is this criterion, cost reduction, more or less important than customer satisfaction? And each person votes on their phone or on their tablet or on the PC or whatever they happen to have. They vote on that in real time, and their votes show up in real time. And then you have a nice discussion about what do we think it really should be. Look, these two guys think it's this guy thinks it's that. What should it really be? And then you go on to the next question. Here, this one's much more important, much more interesting, because these two guys think that cost reduction is more important. But David here, he thinks that risk is much more important, and that's quite a strong preference. So there's a big difference between these, and what you discover when you do this is that the executive team has an amazing, real high value add meeting and discussion about what their overall goals and drivers and priorities in the business are, and they really buy into those goals and drivers. So all this data gets turned into a set of criteria weights, which we then can use to assess the different projects. And again, I want to show you a couple of little things here. There's much more to it than this. There's much more in the product that supports this process, but it'll just give you a flavor. So the first thing that we have here is value. So we've scored each project against those weighted criteria. Now remember that weighting process is so important, because that's what gets alignment and buy-in to the process. That's the thing that gives this process legitimacy, right? And that's what means that your stakeholders end up not trying to go around the side and just jam their projects in anyway. So then you also have a cost dimension. So what that's giving us is value for money. right? So projects in the top left are more valuable, better value for money than projects in the bottom right. So right away we see that we've got in this area we have that value for money chart. We've added here a graph. You can change these, by the way, but here we've got a graph about which sponsors projects are getting done. So we can see that here Abraham Lincoln doesn't have any. Maybe that's okay, but old John Quincy Adams, he's got 3 projects that have been approved so far. So you may want to keep an eye on that, or perhaps look at that by your strategic themes that you focused on, and just make sure you've got some balance in that portfolio. But for the purposes of today's discussion, that's kind of, that's nice. What we're really focused on is making sure we've got a balance between resource and the projects that we select. So we can see straight away up here, and again, I can edit these and change them. I can see that we've exceeded our budget. We've actually got 2 budget measures. We've got this quarter's budget and we've got total capital spend. And we've exceeded both of them, right? So that's not good. And we've also exceeded the total number of person days that are available to us. So this portfolio is a mess. So let's have a look. The first thing that we can see is way out here. We've got a project that is pretty low value and it's very expensive, and that's in the portfolio. Now, what tends to happen if you've done that bit about defining value right, that stakeholder alignment piece, if you've done that right, then everyone, including the guy whose project this is, will look at that and go, we shouldn't be doing that project. So we see pet projects getting killed all the time when people adopt our technology, simply because, let's reject that guy, simply because what was a subjective, hey, that's my project, it's my great idea, project suddenly becomes a rational, quantitative decision that they're making, and the politics just kind of fades away. You're never going to lose it completely, but it fades away. Great. So now we've got these 2 guys under control. I would argue that this project is probably questionable as well. It's quite high value, but it's really expensive compared to these guys over here. So let's kill this guy as well. I tell you, we'll put it on the backlog. So we won't kill it, but we'll put it on the backlog. We won't reject it outright, but we'll put it on ice for now. Now, so this is great. We're still a little bit over this budget, but we're well within these other 2 budgets. So I'm going to have a look at this one, and I'm interested in this this item here. What that's high value, low cost. So why is that rejected? So let's approve that one and see what that does to our numbers. Great. So we're still within our resources here, still within the overall budget. The only thing that we've done is we've kind of blown this Q2 budget a little bit. So maybe the execs now can have a conversation that says, well, maybe we can pull some of our budget from Q3, Q4, because we're well within our overall budget. Maybe we can pull forward some budget from Q3 or Q4 to cover the shortfall here. So that's fine. We can do that. We're well within our ability to deliver it with the resources that we've got. And we've got a portfolio that's delivering high value. And we could even play a little bit further and say, well, if we are going to change this, let's say we brought this forward and we upped the Q2 budget from 15 million, since we're so far under on our overall budget, right? We could probably play with that. We'll change that Q2 budget to 30 million. Now let's see what would happen if we added in one of these guys. And so you can iterate in real time with the decision makers in the room, and as you're iterating, you're seeing what the resources and the budget look like. And you can see we've added in that project. It was good value for money, but actually it's taken us over here. So maybe we take that one out, or maybe we look at one of these other ones and take out. Let's have a look at this guy here. Let's take that guy out and see what happens, and so forth. So you just keep iterating until you come up with a portfolio that everybody likes, but you're getting this real-time feedback that tells us whether or not the portfolio is deliverable. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so we've now got a portfolio that everybody buys into. Now, one of the things that people sometimes say to me is that, well, surely if we've got too many projects, what we should be doing is implementing PPM and playing with other implementation methodologies and all this kind of good stuff so that we can implement faster. Well, that's generally a good thing to do, right? It's generally good to be more efficient at implementing your projects. But doing that, right, getting that PPM tool in place and training all your team and everything else, it takes time and an investment, not just of money, but just time, energy, emotion, persistence to make that stick. Because you're trying to change the way that lots of people do their job. Now, in contrast, this, addressing the prioritization piece of the puzzle that we just looked at now, that's relatively easy. It's a small number of people. It's in the control of the PMO to define that process, or it should be. You should be able to affect that process and sell a change to the team based on the business benefits here that we're going to get, which is, more projects being completed on time, on spec, and delivering business results. That's the key thing. So prioritization is actually, typically we see the quickest way to get an impact versus trying to execute more projects quicker. Both important. You should be certainly working both dimensions, but the prioritization piece is quick. Now this stuff really works. We've got one customer recently. It was classic. They had too many projects, a bunch of pet projects in there that were consuming a load of their resources. And they went through the process that we just looked at. And I know we only did it quickly there, but they went through that process and they got alignment around what value means. And once they got that, and once they had that visual picture of value for money against the resources at the top of the screen there, it was really simple and really obvious to kill off the pet projects that weren't adding value and to focus resources on the projects that were adding value and to stay within the resource constraints that they had. And they had tried over several planning cycles to wrestle this, to really solve this problem of having too many projects. And every single time they failed. And the reason they failed is simply because they didn't have real clarity around what value means, and they didn't have real-time mechanism. They did have a real-time mechanism to see whether or not they had too many projects, but because different people saw different value in the different projects, because they hadn't got that stakeholder alignment piece done, they could never agree on what to take out, and so they ended up leaving everything in. So using our process, using Transparent Choices process, they were able to solve that problem really quickly. And there's those very specific decision science based. It sounds very geeky, but actually it's really simple to do. But that decision science is the thing that really makes the difference between people buying this and it working and you going through the process and ending up with the same old result. A couple of resources, 3 resources in fact, I'm going to point you at. These are all available on our website. I'd encourage you to go watch them. One's a blog that just makes the case that you should never ever run out of resources and explains why. There's another quick blog on project prioritization, that project prioritization challenge. Basically just talks a little bit about why there's a problem, and it's a good piece that you can use to begin the conversation with senior executives, for example. And then there's a whole a series of webinars on portfolio management that's really very good, and it talks a little bit about that time slicing problem I was talking about and how good portfolio management can solve that problem. So keep your donkey's feet on the ground. Don't overload the portfolio. Use good tools and good process to help you achieve that. Transparent Choice, we believe, obviously, is a really good tool for doing this. It really works. It gets those executives aligned, and it lets you right-size the projects off the back of that alignment. So we're here to help you right-size that project, keep the donkey's feet on the ground, keep your truck the right way up, and we'll be there to help you.